Fisherman's Post. More fish, more often.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series. This episode is titled Early Summer Spade Fishing. I'm going to be talking with Captain Chris Ossman, fine catch fishing charters operating out of the Little River area. And we're going to be covering such topics such as tackle and bait and location, anchoring, and using electronics to find and catch these spade fish. My name is Gary Hurley, your host, and we'd like to welcome you to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series. Fisherman's Post has been serving the saltwater fishing community of North Carolina since 2003. We've been bringing you fishing reports, fishing tournaments, fishing schools, fishing information, membership content, and now here in our latest and greatest effort, the podcast series, where we reach out to our captain and guide friends up and down the coast and ask them to share with us their thoughts, their insights, their knowledge on how to catch more fish more often. I'm joined by my co-host, David Harden of Harden Creative Media. How you doing, David?
Hey, Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to be talking to Chris. I call him a longtime friend now, and been fishing with a couple times. I know he's full of information, and even better, he's willing to share.
No, yeah, and I tell you, as far as spadefish go, I know very little about the spadefish, so I'm going to be taking lots of notes. I'm going to have multiple pens of this time.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity we have off the coast, and I think many people are like you, don't know much about it, and they should, man. It's often one of my favorite trips, especially if you got kids involved, but we'll let Chris tell the tale.
Yeah. So what else people should know about are our sponsors. Port City Signs and Graphics is the first one.
I love Port City Signs and Graphics. I love Sabrina. And I say the team because that's what I send my emails to, the team at Port City Signs and Graphics. Great group.
Yeah, they do all kinds of work. They do everything from exterior signs, interior, vinyl decals, and they'll even do your boat.
I know they do boat wraps. I haven't pulled the trigger on that kind of a fancy wrap for my 22-foot bay boat, but, you know.
That's something to think about.
So that's a good-looking boat.
Maybe next year. It is a really good-looking boat.
It's a really good-looking boat.
It's a nice trailer, too.
They do great work.
It is. You know who else does great work?
I think I know.
Marine Warehouse Center.
Love those guys.
They're great.
Sales, service, parts, and I think we have a video.
We do.
Matt with Marine Warehouse, excited to give you guys a huge update. We're now carrying Seabourn and Spider boat line. Of course, we have the newest models of Carolina Skiff, Sailfish, Sea Chaser, and Pan Marine. With over 60 boats in stock at a Wilmington location, let's schedule a sea trial and let's get you on the water today.
Well, David, I tell you what, in May, I let you talk about your experience with Marine Warehouse Center, but I'm going to remind people, because I've done it before. Man, one of my favorite parts of the relationship with Marine Warehouse Center is in February, sometimes March, if I'm dragging my feet a little bit. I take them my boat, I take them a laundry list of items to tackle, and then I'm set for the whole season. You know, they do the spring service, do a bottom paint, and then they just touch everything that I ask them to touch, and I start every boating season with a boat working perfectly. And I thank Marine Warehouse Center for that. That is not a small thing. That's a luxury, but it's a luxury they provide for everyone. I'm just one of the ones that take advantage.
Yeah, good folks over there. I've had a good experience with them too, with my boat.
But I tell you, Emmett, I'm cool with. Terrell, he can be a little taxing. You know what he told me this week?
In what way?
Well, I'll tell you what he told me this way. He got me on the phone because the guy texts, he calls. I don't know what he does there because he has so much time. But he actually told me this time, it wasn't even a joke. It was some upsetting news that a friend of his got kidnapped.
Oh, no.
A friend of his got kidnapped by a bunch of mimes, and they did unspeakable things to him.
Very nice.
Did you see that coming?
I didn't, but I should have.
I didn't, but I should have.
I should have seen that coming.
But enough about him and his bad jokes.
Yes.
Enough about him. David, if someone else were to sponsor the show, how would they do that?
Well, all they have to do is contact the Fisherman's Post office and let us know what you're interested in doing. If you're interested in doing a sponsorship, we'd love to hear from you.
You know, I'm going to use this time to make a quick plug at the Fisherman's Post website. We also have lots of other benefits. We're starting this year. If you like the podcast, want to support the podcast, you can sign up for early podcast release. So you get all these podcasts a week earlier, whether audio or video format. And in addition, we are this year offering bonus content. So there'll be another 10 minutes or so of footage that we don't make part of the public podcast that we release, but it's behind that membership wall. So just go to fishermanspost.com, look for member content, and you can decide if you'd like to sign up.
Sounds good.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition to introduce our captain, Chris Ossman, for the show. But before I do so, David, I need you to pay attention. I need you to pay attention, not just because you don't know much about spadefish, but because we are going to wrap this episode up with, again, not Billy's best takeaway, but as our focus group determined, David's best takeaway.
I'll be ready.
All right, David's best takeaway. But now it's my pleasure to introduce back to the podcast, Captain Chris Ossman, Fine Catch Fishing Charters out of the Little River area. Welcome back to the podcast, sir.
Glad to be back, Gary. Glad to be back.
And yeah, it's a topic that's near and dear to both our hearts, spadefish. We try to do a spadefish trip every year. But before I get you talking about early summer spade fishing, as tradition goes, you have to answer two questions. You tell me you're ready.
Oh, boy.
I give you question.
Ready.
I give you question number one. All right. Why should we listen to anything you have to say about a spadefish?
Because spadefish is one of those fun, fighting, visual eating fish. It's one of those fish that you could see come around the boat in the early summer, and it could be frustrating not to catch them. But when you do hook them, they're a world of fun.
All right. That is an acceptable answer to question number one. Question number two. I'm playing off of Fine Catch in your charter name, and I've got some fine catchphrases from movies. I actually have two. I'm going to give you the catchphrase. You tell me the movie. Are you ready, sir?
Let's do it.
To infinity and beyond.
Toy Story.
Right on. And then the other one, say hello to my little friend.
Scarface.
You got him. You're rolling. You passed both questions. So let's talk about it. In our show notes, you have that you're going to start us off with tackle. And if that's cool, we'll start with tackle. If you want to start somewhere else, we'll start somewhere else.
No, let's start with tackle because that's what you can get before you get on the boat. We'll get it rolling.
All right, what you got?
So tackle-wise, coming from whatever rod you really want, it's for me, I use like a medium action rod, something that's got a little bit of a backbone and something that's got a little harder tip, fast tip on it. Because when you set these fish and they start digging on you, you want to be able to keep them out of the structure down there. So definitely a rod with a little bit of backbone. You can play with them with some like light stuff, but don't be afraid when you get broke off because those things just hammer you down into the wreck. Reel size, really you can go anywhere from a 2,500 up to a 4,000. A lot of the areas where we're catching these are going to be in that, 30 to 60 foot range. So they only go down and around the structure. They're not going to spoil you or anything. So if you want to catch them on a small reel, a 25 to 4,000 size reel, under 200 yards is plenty enough on there. And braid size, I mean, really you want something that you can kind of have a little bit of strength with. I use anything from 15 to 30 pound braid on them. It's something that's going to give you a little bit of a backbone in there. And really when we're fishing early season, a lot of times our leaders are going to be, we can get away with 15, 20 early on, but after these fish kind of get caught and played around with for a while, you can drop down to about 12 pound fluorocarbon to kind of get these fish feeding a little bit. They're very visual feeders. They look around, they can see really well, even though they can come right up to the boat and look like they're dumb as can be, but these things will definitely see everything you got going. And rig wise with the tackle, so I got these rigged up on 12 pound leader right now. So normally how I start is going to be a little split shot rig. So you got like a little one, I think these are a number 1 circle hook right here, snelled on there. If you buy your snelled hooks, make sure you snell your leaders. I always see it all the time where people just tie them on there. If you see it, it's like that. It goes right through the eye. with a little split shot right there. You want to be able, these fish don't come right to the boat. You want to be able to kind of drop that bait in the water and let it gradually drift back to them. So kind of add your weight to how your bait's moving back to these fish. You don't want to blunk right in the water and just look unnatural. If the current's running real strong, though, you can use like a drop rig. So almost like you would have like a bottom rig like that. There's a couple overhead knots to just a little weight, teardrop weight on the bottom there. You drop it straight down, hold it right in front of their face, wait for them to grab it. When you see them grab it, just pull tight. You don't have to set the hook with these circle hooks. When you see them eat it, just start reeling. When you feel the fish on there, the hook's going to do all the work for you. And if they're really getting finicky with these baits, and let's say they've been messed with a lot, what we use for trout fishing inshore, like the slip cork rigs, right? Your bobber stop, your float, your weight right there. Well, instead of using a treble hook like we normally use, we use a little bit longer leader to that snelled hook. I'll show you. It's snelled on there. Don't just tie it on the top there. You want that hook to roll into that fish. You follow me, Gary?
Yeah, man, I'm following you. I do have a follow-up question already. So
Yeah.
are you a believer in fluoro when it comes to those rigs? Like everything you show me, is that mono? Is it fluoro? Does it matter to you?
It's all fluoro, mainly because if he does get you down there in that structure, and if you've ever seen the teeth inside a spadefish, they're really weird, gnarly looking teeth. You want that fluorocarbon. It's more abrasive to that structure or their teeth right there. If they swallow the hook, you're going to get away with reusing that leader more often. If you were using mono, it tends to break a little bit easier. So especially on the lighter side, the fluorocarbon definitely will help you out better.
All right, and I got one other question, and I think you addressed it. So you're an advocate of snelled hook because you like the action of it hooking the fish, specifically with a circle hook best? Is that what I heard?
So when they eat it, you really just want to be able to just roll tight into them. You don't want to snatch it out of their mouth. You want them to have it eat it, and they kind of eat it and kind of roll off with it. So as they roll off with it, you just kind of reel tight. And with the way these circle hooks work, man, if you got it just right like that, it should pull right into it. So, I mean, once it goes in there, it'll pull right into it. If you have it off the top on there and it's up this way, it's not going to have the rolling action to get that circle hook to get them in the corner or right in the mouth there. It's going to want to pull opposite of it.
Okay, I follow all that, man.
There you go.
If you got something else on tackle, let me know. Otherwise, I guess this is our point where we transition to bait.
Yeah, so a little bit of bait, a little bit of extra gear that you might want to bring with you to help you with the bait. So typically when we go for these spadefish, the number one bait we try to find are jellyfish. So along our beach right here, and it's all going on between early May, late June, you'll see these jellyfish in the water, these cannonball jellies. A lot of these cannonball jellies, they wash up on the beach. They'll be around your inlet. They'll be around your tide lines. Some days you see 1 million of them, and other days you can't find one. But those jellyfish are an excellent bait for spadefish. Don't ask me why they like jellyfish. I can't tell you why, but I can tell you they love them. So when you get these baits, what you want to do is you want to have either just your typical stringer. The Bass Pro has like a red, yellow stringer. You know, you have a loop on one side and you have that needle piece on the one side. Try to get you at least a half a dozen jellyfish. And before I go any further, you definitely want to get you a bucket on the boat. Don't go throwing these jellyfish in your live well if you have any other bait in there. Some guys go out there cobia fishing while they're spade fishing and stuff like that. You start throwing these jellyfish in your live well with your bait, it's going to kill them. So I always tell someone to bring a 5-gallon bucket or some other bucket as you're going out there, and make sure you have a good landing net, because you're going to be scooping them up just like on SpongeBob. You're going jellyfishing. You're going to be scooping them out of the water. You go around, you net them, grab them and throw them in that bucket or drop them in that bucket. Try not to get them on your boat. That little purplish ring around the outside of those jellyfish will stain the heck out of it. They're not going to hurt you. If you got an open cut, it might sting a little bit, but they're not the kind of jellyfish that's going to put you in the hospital or make someone pee on your hand or something like that. You know. So,
All right, good.
But the jellyfish definitely the best. You definitely want to add a little bit of weight to that stringer on the end there. So once you put 2 or 3 jellyfish through that stringer and wrap it back through that hole, you want to add a weight on there. I normally use like a 6 or 10 ounce sinker, throw it down on that line, and then wrap it around a line and tie it either off my cleat, or if you have a downrigger on your boat. Not everyone has a downrigger, but I have a removable one that goes in my rod holder. I can actually attach it to that downrigger and extend it out about 4 or 5 feet off the boat too, which can help you sometimes when you're bringing those fish up to kind of get you from fishing right underneath the boat and get you off the side of the boat right there. So the other alternative to that stringer, and I don't see them as much anymore because everyone's got these plastic hangers. I don't know if you see them a lot, but the metal old school hangers. If you get those metal old school hangers and you untwist the top, you can put those jellyfish down on that hanger, retwist it up top, close that loop on the top, tie that to a fishing rod or a line or your downrigger off the side of the boat. Works just as good. Do add a little bit of weight on there because sometimes when these spadefish, if you don't see them right away, but you can mark them on your screen and they're down deep and they're having trouble coming up, you can drop your jellyfish down towards the bottom there and kind of encourage them to come up. They'll start feeding on that jellyfish down there and, they get, I guess, stupid and just come on up with it. So it's one of those things you can kind of get them up there, get them visual, get them right next to the boat.
Yeah, man, I follow. So again, the advantage of a downrigger is that if you're lucky enough to get the fish to follow the bait up, you're able to see them better because they're not, say, directly under the boat. Is that what I heard?
Yeah. So sometimes you can play the current. I know before I had my downrigger and doing it that way, I just had it tied off to the side of the cleat. So I'd look to see which way the current was going. You don't want the current to be rolling your jellyfish underneath the boat because then you can't really see what's going on. Move it to the other side and kind of use the current to kind of let it pull away from your boat as well too, kind of helps. And an alternative bait, it helps to have jellyfish, but sometimes it's good to bring a little bit of fresh dead shrimp with you too. You take a little piece off, kind of resemble a jellyfish kind of deal. The spadefish will eat a little bit of shrimp as well. And kind of float it just back, just like you would your jellyfish. So,
Okay, man.
Yeah.
I follow all that. I guess I would say, we've already sort of talked about posting up, but man, where is it that you're going, man? If our next line item is location, and everyone knows location is important, so doing everything right but being in the wrong spot is not going to work for you. So for the person watching this podcast, what do they need to know about finding a location before you even tell us how to set up on a location?
So it really depends on season wise. Early season, a lot of these spadefish haven't really moved in thick. You're talking mid-May, end of May into, mid to late June. So early mid-May, beginning of June, a lot of these fish are just starting to trickle their way in. You might get a handful of fish on these inshore wrecks and stuff, but primarily I like to start like 50 plus feet of water. So all your artificial reefs that are 50 plus foot, for instance, in the Little River area, we have like our 10 mile, which is right about 55 feet. All that structure right there is a great early season target for spadefish. Once they get off that deeper stuff, they come in that area there. And I like to kind of scoot around and kind of run over a lot of pieces of structure just to kind of see if they mark up. When they mark up on the screen, you can pretty much tell. It's like if you've ever, if you have a side scan or if you have your electronics and you come across a big pot of bait, it's basically going to mark up like a big pot of bait, but just bigger marks. And you'll be able to see them individual marks versus just a big cloud of bait. So you kind of cruise around the structure. I always start with the superstructure. Start with your biggest piece of structure, whether it be like this big barge or your ACP or your tugs. There's a big tug out there at our 10 mile. A lot of those big pieces of structure are going to kind of draw them in first. So start there, look around, use your electronics. I know a lot of guys that have electronics, and they tell me they don't even know how to use them. They've had them on the boat. They've paid thousands of dollars for them. Don't know how to use them. And then I have to hop on their boat, and I show them, it's like, here, first of all, you got to get your settings right. Make sure your settings are good. And then this is what you're looking for. So learn your electronics. And once you figure that out, it'll help you locate those fish on those structures. Now, that's early season. Later season spadefish, they kind of scatter themselves all over the place inshore. I've caught them off our jetties. I've caught them on structure 20 foot to 50 foot. I mean, they're all in that inshore range there. So, for instance, our 3 mile reef in the summertime, talking mid to later June, almost July, we'll say, we're actually seeing more of those spadefish on that structure in there, and that's about 30 foot of water. There's a couple other wrecks out there in about the same distance and same depth that will hold those fish. Now, those fish tend to be a little bit smaller than the ones offshore. I've noticed that the further you go out, the bigger they do get, but they also get smarter the bigger they get because they've been around for a while. Them old fish.
Men, are they moving in because of water temperature? Are they moving in because of bait? I mean, why earlier out further and then warmer water in closer? Is it that simple? Warmer water?
I mean, that's kind of how they migrate. Warmer water, definitely. They're getting into that range where that's where they feel more comfortable. That's kind of where they want to be. And a lot of those jellyfish, they'll get some of those clear looking jellies out there offshore, but I really think those cannonballs are their main target when they come in, if they can get those, and they love to eat them. So that's their migration kind of moving in.
And if I'm looking for them on electronics and understanding bait but looking at individual marks, so I'm definitely looking for a pod of fish or a group of fish. I'm not looking for just a couple of individual fish. I mean, is that how they hang? They hang in groups, whether it's early summer or midsummer?
So they're going to be in schools, big schools. Those are the ones you want. You can get in like smaller schools where you see a dozen or so, but the schools that I've seen that are easier to catch from could be anywhere from 50 to 60 fish up to 200 plus fish. I've seen it before where these schools will come up and it'll look like just a cloud is coming up with these fish, and there's so many of them. And at that point, you got to get excited, because when you see that many come up and they come right to your boat and start eating on that jellyfish, I've had many times where I've gotten them so close to the boat there and so fired up on the jellyfish where I could reach down and grab them with my hands. And they just don't, they go into a frenzy basically. So, the tactics and stuff that I'm going over now, yeah, that's the way to do it. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting a hook in front of their face and watching them eat it. And that's all you really need. Yeah.
All right. So we've found some spots, like you're coached us on scouting out a location. We found a location. I mean, on your boat, are you anchoring? And I mean by anchoring these days, I guess we're all talking about spot lock and not actually anchoring. Or what are you doing once you get a place that gives you confidence?
So this, for instance, I mean, if you have spot lock, it makes the world it makes everything easy. You can spot lock right on that area there. If you don't, there was a couple alternatives. You can throw a regular anchor and try to play the drift and get yourself over that piece of structure that those fish are hanging on. Sometimes they don't like to venture too far away from that structure, so you really want to be on top of it if you can. There's a couple pieces of structure. If you're not right on the center there, you can sit there and watch someone catch spadefish all day long and they won't come to you. So getting on top of the structure and centrally being over it definitely helps. That's where this other alternative comes in. I had one on an old boat of mine, and it's called a reef anchor. So it's a piece of metal with a couple rebars on the end there, and basically you're snagging that big piece of structure down there, and you're keeping yourself up and down on that structure. So if you drop that hook down there, which is basically a big hook, and then come tight and then pull that thing tight to your boat and cleat it off so you don't move, you'll be vertical on that piece of structure that you're snagged to until the time comes when you need to unhook yourself. Those rebars, you pull them hard enough and you can actually bend them out and then rebend them back. So that is a good alternative, especially when spade fishing, when you need to be on top of that structure. But spot lock definitely has by far the best ability to be able to anchor yourself down right over top of that piece of structure and then be able to move. Sometimes you get on one piece of structure, let's say you get crowded with people, and then you can kind of move yourself around and fish another piece of structure and get away from all that. Versus if you're anchored up, you're kind of, there's nothing you can really do besides pull it and redo it again, and that's a pain in the butt. No one wants to do that. So once you get on them, really that dropping that bait down there to them too. Like I said, if you get those jellyfish and you got them on stringers and you got them like over that structure, you really want to be able to drop it down to the bottom. Sometimes they don't want to come up, and then watch those spadefish eat that jellyfish, or you could feel them in the line. A lot of times I drop it down there, I can feel it, and it'll start like pulsating in the line there, and you start slowly kind of bringing it up like you're crabbing. And then all of a sudden, once you get it up there, you'll see them follow it up, and that's all you need right there. And then it's just game over. You just pitch them to them, and they watch them eat.
So I follow everything. I like that analogy about like crabbing and bringing them up slowly. And then you get them within sight, and then you're pitching the baits to them. That's what we're saying, or we're letting that bait sort of float down.
So it's two different ways. So you have that float rig that I showed you where you can kind of float it back to them. And then you also have that bottom, well, basically your drop shot rig where you can kind of just drop it straight down to them and then kind of place it right over top of where your actual jellyfish is. And really, if you have it up high enough and you can actually see them feeding on it, like I said, you just watch them eat it and just kind of pull up and start reeling it and come tight to that fish. And then he'll take off. And when he takes off, he pretty much hooks himself with that circle hook.
All right. So I guess what I'm hearing is ideally those fish follow up the jelly balls and you see them and you pitch a bait to them and they all but hook themselves. But like, does it always go like that? You know, I think you showed me one rig with a big weight. Are you sometimes you're aware that they're there and you can feel them on the line, but you have to drop your baits down and try to hook them without seeing them? Is that something that happens? Or if they don't come up, they're just not going to participate that day?
So there's scenarios where some of these fish may not cooperate as well. And that's if you got rougher conditions out there. The ideal spadefish day is a slick, calm day. When it's slick, calm, and your bait's not moving around crazy, that's perfect. But sometimes you got rougher days where the boat's bouncing up and down, your bait's moving around side by side, and you kind of have to get those baits kind of down a little bit lower. At that point, if you drop it down like about mid-water column, say they're not coming up to the top, drop it down mid-water column and just kind of set it right there, and kind of, you don't want the bait going up and down too crazy. So kind of as you rock, just kind of keep it kind of steady. And then you're just waiting for tension. And once you feel that tension, you basically just start reeling and he's on there. And that's kind of how, if they don't want to come up. I know we've had scenarios where we've tried to go out there and spadefish, and Gary, you always seem to book the roughest day possible. I don't know how you do it, but you're good at it. You're good at booking the rough days. So you've seen it firsthand. If it's rough out there, they'll come up, but sometimes they don't want to play.
So that's interesting. So sometimes they won't come up, and sometimes they'll come up and they won't play. And then, but if the calmer it is out there, then that's your best chance to get everything to come together.
Yeah, they can be kind of spookish sometimes to the point where they just feel comfortable kind of being able to come up, do their own thing, and then kind of feed off that jellyfish. I actually went off and tried to find some fish a little further offshore not too long, and I ran into a problem where we had too many amberjack around the boat. So these spadefish were getting pushed off of the jelly ball because the amberjack were too curious and not giving the spadefish space to get up there and actually feed off of it. So different things like that can mess you up. But if you get in an area where you don't have any big predator fish that really are that curious, you can get the spadefish to come right up.
You've been talking about larger size fish offshore and some smaller fish inshore. And I guess just for reference, like what are you talking about when you're talking about a bigger spadefish? What are you talking about when you're talking about a smaller spadefish?
So bigger spadefish, I'm talking 5 to 10 pounds. You're looking at something in the 24 to 27 inch range, like big spadefish. If the smaller ones, I'm talking probably anywhere from small like 10 to 16 inches kind of deal on the inshore side.
And what would you say, like when you're doing your trips, what's too small? Like what's sort of the bottom line that you say, hey, that's really not going to fillet. That's really more for fun. That's not to put in the boat and take home.
I want something over 17 inches because when it comes to cleaning these spadefish, they really have a big set of rib cage. For instance, just like your sheep's head, they have a big rib cage. So really, you got to cut around the rib cage. You're not getting a whole lot of meat right up underneath it. So they may look like they're real big, but once you cut that rib cage out and get around there and cut that fillet out, and there's not as much meat as you would actually think. The other thing is when you do clean these spadefish, now the bigger spadefish, of course, are going to have a bigger bloodline in them. So the bigger the bloodline, the more meat you're going to have to probably cut out of that fish. Don't eat them with the bloodline in them. I've prepared it for people and they've loved it, and then they've said they've gone out and caught spadefish themselves and cooked it and said it was nasty. And the whole reason behind that, I don't care what kind of fish it is, if you eat the bloodline of the fish, it's going to make it taste bad. That's the fishiest part of the fish right there. So do yourself a favor. When you clean fish, clean that bloodline out, get all your bones out, make it nice, pretty white fillets because there'd be white meat in there. And I'd rather waste it at the fillet table than waste it on the dinner table. And that's just the motto I go by, because no one wants to, once you eat that fishy piece of fish, your appetite kind of goes downhill.
Okay, that's good advice. I have another, to go back to fishing, to go back to helping make sure we put a fish in the boat, to use that waste, leave it on the fillet table, not on the kitchen table. Man, what about drag? Like, if these things are apt to break you off in the wreck, but you're trying to use 15 to 30 pound fluoro, I mean, are you trying to just push the line to its limit as far as setting the drag so that they can't pull?
No, you want to, when you first hook these fish, they're going to burn drag. Most of these smaller reels are going to have a max drag of probably 10 to maybe 15 pounds at most, really. You figure a 12 or a 2500 size Battle 2 reel has 12 pounds of drag. So if you max it out, it's got 12 pounds total. If you're using 15-pound leader, the only way it's going to break is if you can't tie knots. So make sure you definitely tie some good line-to-line knots, and you shouldn't have an issue. You don't want to crank it down, but you want it to be snug where if you're pulling it with your hands with the braid, it's going to start to kind of cut in there a little bit. You want to be able to pull, but if you're pulling with your hands, it's going to start to get in there. So you want something that's tight, and then we're using smaller hooks too. So it's catch-22. So use smaller hooks, lighter leader, and you're trying to use heavier drag, you're going to lose some fish. It's going to happen. Whether you lose it when pulling the hook or you're going to lose them in the wreck from wrapping you up. I'd rather pull the hook than have them break off and have to retie over and over again kind of deal. So I will go a little bit heavier on the drag. Once you kind of get them up after that first run, they're going to burn it down you can kind of crank down on them a little bit because they've exhausted a lot of their energy on that first run, and then kind of horse them up. And at that point, you'll kind of get them in a pinwheel. So they're going to just start doing circles, really kind of coming up on there. And once they do that, it's game over. You got them coming up. So at that point, they're going to just come up to the surface, net them, put them in the boat. I will say on a couple of occasions in some of these areas, there are some big sharks that like to lurk around these wrecks. So if you do try to play them too soft sometimes, not only will the wreck get them, but these sharks will get them too. I've had many times where I've had big tiger sharks come up and eat my fish because people have kind of played them too easy. And all of a sudden, you're gone.
Well, I had what I thought was some really good question, but you might have just sort of alluded to it, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. And in my mind, not many people have done the spade fishing. So what I hope is people listen to this podcast and say, man, I want to give this a shot, or maybe call Chris Ossman and say, I want to give this a shot. But for those that this might be their first time, and from a captain that takes, I would guess, people first time fishing for spadefish often, like what is the main piece of advice or that you're giving people to help them hook the fish, or the problems that you see? And then same question for fighting the fish. Do you see, is there a common mistake that you're often trying to guide people away from when they're on your boat?
So one of the big things I see is, like I said before, people trying to snatch the bait out of their mouth. It's just like trying to catch a fish on top water. You try to yank it as soon as you see him blow up on it, but you're going to rip it out. He's not going to have it. Let him eat it and just kind of pull tight. Once you kind of reel tight on that fish, he's going to feel that hook and take off and basically hook himself. So you don't need to snatch it. None of the, bill dance, no bass hook sets, kind of stuff like that. It's real simple. Kind of let them reel into it and then watch them run. The other thing is when people are fighting these fish, a lot of times people want to reel against the drag. If the drag is screaming, there's no sense in reeling. It's just one of those things where you're just going to tire yourself out and just twist the line up. You're not gaining any line while he's burning the drag down. You're just reeling for no reason. That's it. And I try to tell people, say, hey, you hear the drag? Stop. Let him run until it slows down. When it stops, then start reeling. And as you're reeling, the easiest way to get these fish up is to use the rod the way the rod was intended to be used. Don't just put it up over your head, high stick it. I always tell people, just don't bring the rod tip over your head. Just short pumps up, and you will get these fish up a lot faster. You start high sticking the rod and this and that, you're going to probably hit your T-top. You break it off. You might break a rod, break a tip that way because that's not the way the rod was intended to be used. But if you use short, small pumps, lift up, reel down. Lift up, reel down. A lot of people just don't know how to properly use the rod to their advantage.
Okay, I follow that. So then, again, I guess my next question has to do, I'm going to go back to finding fish because, again, I know that is just part of the overall hurdle for any trip success. So as you said, man, many of us don't know how to use our electronics. Like, if I'm not sure I'm using them correctly, like, do I need to see something to drop it down? Do you need to see something to drop it down? Or sometimes you will just test the waters. And for someone like me, where you've got your spots, but I'm still trying to figure it out, like, how long do I invest in a spot if I'm not feeling anything on the drop down? If I'm just not feeling it, how long would you tell me to invest before I move to a new spot? And would I move off that spot to a completely new spot or just change my location on that first spot?
So if you circled, let's say you're on one piece of structure, it's got scattered stuff around it. If you anchor up on the superstructure there and you give it 30 minutes, you drop a jellyfish down to the bottom there and wait and nothing's coming on it and you don't see anything in the water coming up. Spadefish are curious sometimes. They'll swim right up to the boat when you pull up. Heck, I've dropped cobia lines back with balloons and they'll come up to the balloons. So in 30 minutes, you should have a good idea if those fish are there and they want to play. If you don't get anything in 30 minutes, I would probably change location. I would move somewhere else and then find the superstructure in that general area. Sometimes, like our 10 miles got, I don't know, it's got 30 pieces of structure down there. So by all means, they could be on a smaller piece of structure. I've seen one box car down there hold 100+ spadefish, where the 100-foot tug over there didn't have any on them. So definitely venture around. Normally it's a superstructure, but don't be surprised if they're on a little piece of structure off of that. So I would definitely invest a little bit of time if you're confident in a spot, and it's one of those spots where historically you've heard people say they caught spadefish there. You've seen people catch spadefish there. Definitely invest in going around it. And if you mark anything that looks like a big school of fish below the boat, that's where you need to be.
All right. I think we're at the end of your podcast. And so what I do before we say goodbye is say, I guess, two things. One is, if someone's intrigued by this, but they want the confidence of going with you, remind us again, in general, what you see to be the spadefish season down in the Little River area. And then my other question would just be, man, any final thoughts? Any way you want to leave your podcast with, what we should know or reflective about spadefish?
So, man, spadefishing is just, from experience that I've heard from the people I've taken out there. I've taken a couple customers, all kinds of fishing, backwater redfish, trout galore, topwater, whatever, cobia fishing, offshore grouper fishing. I've taken them out and do it. But the one thing that I hear more people saying that was amazing, and that was something I want to do every year, let me know when they come back around, is spadefish. Because it's one of those things where those spadefish, it's such a visual feeding fish. And you can look it up online. There's a bunch of YouTubes and stuff like that and channels where you can see underwater footage of these spadefish coming up in massive schools. And to visually see a fish feed and catch it, it gets my blood pumping. I see it all the time. So for something to get my blood pumping, it's definitely something that's entertaining for me. And like I said, to come fish with me and do it and have a good time, it's by far one of the most interactive visual fishing trips that you'll ever go on, and be able to catch quality, good eating fish.
I think that's a great way to end it. Captain Chris Ossman, fine catch fishing charters out of the Little River area. I've certainly enjoyed this conversation, and I enjoy our spade fishing trip every year.
Oh yeah, we always have a good spade fishing trip.
All right, we'll check in with you soon, Chris.
Yep.
David Harden.
Hello, Gary.
Did you enjoy my conversation with Chris?
I did. I learned a lot about spadefish. I didn't know really a thing about spadefish before about 30 minutes ago. But now I feel like I could, talk intelligently, at least to about 10 seconds about spadefish.
I think you could talk 10 seconds intelligently about spade fishing after listening to Chris. I agree with that. But, officially, we need to hear David's best takeaway. So lots of information, all of it new. What do you got for me? Best takeaway.
Okay. So, this, and he talked about this a lot. But now I know what to do with those big old jellyfish. So if you see one floating and you're out fishing, get your net out, scoop up one of those jellyfish, put it in a separate bucket, not your bait bucket, but put it in a separate bucket. Go out to some 50 feet of structure and see if you can catch a spadefish.
All right. That sounds like a very good David's best takeaway. Let's wrap this show up, David.
Sure. We just want to thank our sponsors again, Port City Science and Graphics, and also a Marine Warehouse Center, two fabulous sponsors of the podcast. But if you would like to be a part of the podcast, contact the Fisherman's Post office, and we'll help you out.
Yeah, and again, we offer early podcast releases. We offer bonus content. We're going to continue our conversation with Chris Ossman for about 10 minutes or so and release it for our member content. And it just feels good to be back in the podcast chair. It feels good to be talking to these guys again. Again, we're fortunate. We've got great captains willing to share information, and we're glad you joined us.
Fisherman.